Hello and welcome. My name's Angie Holden and I'm the blogger behind the Country Chic Cottage. Today I'm going to do a stenciling project, but a very large one. So if you've ever wanted to stencil a very large surface, even furniture, this video is for you. Now this video is sponsored by Rust-Oleum. However, all projects and opinions are my own. And I'm going to use their Rust-Oleum chalked paint on this one. A couple different colors, linen white and serenity blue, as well as a matte clear top coat. So we're going to talk about how to use this paint along with the stencil to get a custom look for your craft projects. So let's dive in and take a look at the supplies we're going to use. So we're going to use the chalked paint from Rust-Oleum. It's an ultra matte paint and you'll need the paint that you're going to use for the stencil as well as a top coat. Now this is one of my favorite paints to apply to furniture. I love that ultra matte finish for furniture in my home. I'm going to use linen white as my base coat and then serenity blue as the stencil coat. And then on top I'm going to put a matte clear finish. Now I love that this dries to a smooth finish and that it's usually a one coat coverage. It will depend on your surface on this base coat, especially the white, because it's so light. It'll depend on your surface, you may need a couple of coats. Then we're also going to need the stencil itself. I'm going to cut it with my Cricut Venture and I'm going to use Cricut Smart Stencil and then transfer tape to apply it to my tabletop. A weeding hook, paint brushes, stencil brushes especially for the stencil portion, probably a larger brush for your base coat, scraper, and sandpaper. So this is a 400 grit sandpaper. I would say 300 or higher. We are going to use that between coats. Now, before your first coat, you'll want to sand down your surface really well with a heavier grit sandpaper, like 120, something like that, to really get your surface nice and smooth. And then I have this scraper here, but I'll also be using a very large ruler because the stencil is so large to apply the stencil itself. So now let's take a look at how to make our stencil on the Cricut Venture. Click upload, then upload your SVG file. You will need to find that file on your computer. I do have this file for free and I will link it in the description below this video. Once it's uploaded, add it to your canvas. Now I'm going to zoom out here because I want to put an example tabletop on here, which is what I'm stenciling. So I'm going to put a square. I'm going to unlock that square and I'm going to make it 48 wide and 24 high. And this represents the tabletop that I'm stenciling. And I'm going to go ahead and send that to the back. And you can even change the color so you can see your stencil a little better. On the tabletop, I want 2 of this pattern, so I'm going to duplicate it. Then I'm going to line these up. We could zoom in a little bit. Line the 2 up exactly how you like them. Then we'll zoom back out. Pick both of the stencil designs. Move them over our rectangle here and resize them to fit the table. So I'm going to resize where I like it to be. Now I want to paint just as it's shown, so I want to paint these black areas. If I wanted to paint the opposite, I might put a square around this so I could weed it a little bit easier. Or if I wanted to make a very small stencil, again I might put a square around it and slice the shapes out. However, because I'm using the 25-inch smart vinyl, I'm going to just want to put this in the center of my smart vinyl. So I'm going to delete that square back off. But I do need to pick both of these and click attach. I do have Venture picked as my machine and I'm going to go ahead and click make it. We're going to zoom out and I can see my design on the Smart Stencil material. Now I do want this kind of centered because I want the same amount hanging off of both ends. So I'm going to kind of center it up just by eye on the stencil material. Now it does say my material needs to be 50 inches in length. And one roll of the Smart Stencil material is 60 inches, so I'm fine there. So I'm going to go ahead and click continue. So then we're just going to head to our Cricut Venture machine. I have the material settings set to Smart Stencil material. I went ahead and loaded my roll into the Venture. Cricut Design Space will walk you through all of these steps. You just want to make sure that your rollers are set to the widest setting because I am using the 25-inch Smart Stencil material. Then you go ahead and load your material and then press go to cut. The Cricut Venture will cut the entire roll. Now at the end here, you have the option to trim off the material with the auto cutoff blade. There's also a manual cutoff tool that you can use. However, I'm just going to remove the whole roll from the machine. There's not that much left on the roll, and I may want it to mask off part of my tabletop, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it for now. And I can cut it off using the grid lines on the back of the stencil material later if I would like. I'm using the docking stand for my Cricut Venture, so I'm able to use the roll holder in the back, as well as the baskets to catch my material. However, if you don't have that, you'll want to use your Venture on the end of your table, and be sure to attach the roll holder that comes with Cricut Venture. Once everything's done, I went ahead and removed my vinyl from the machine. Now let's take a look at weeding it. Next, you'll want to weed your stencil. Now you're going to weed away the areas that you want to be painted. In my case, I want to paint in these stenciled areas, so I'm going to remove all of those. So I'll just continue and weed the entire design across the entire surface. First, I'm going to paint my tabletop white. Now I'm using a tabletop, so it'll be very easy for me to capture these images for this YouTube video. However, for you, the same process could be used on any piece of furniture or any large stenciling project that you have. As I said before, the tabletop was sanded very, very well before I started. Then I started with the Rust-Oleum chalked paint in linen white. After the tabletop was sanded, it was cleaned very, very well. If you are painting over a glossy surface, be sure to sand it well. And you might even want to lightly wipe the surface with mineral spirits in order to get rid of some of that shiny coating. Now, one of the great things about this chalked paint is that priming is not required for most surfaces. In rare instances, when you're using like a light color like this white, on wood types that have heavy knots or discoloration, you may get some bleeding through the paint. Now, I'm going for a fairly rustic look for my home, so I'm just going to go ahead and go over this with the chalked paint on my first coat. However, if you want to make sure that nothing bleeds through, you can use an oil-based stain blocking primer, such as Zinsser Cover Stain. That will provide extra protection against those bleeding issues. So when you start painting, you want to be sure to stir it thoroughly. And you want to use a high quality synthetic brush. Roller application is actually not recommended for this paint. You also want to avoid excessive brushing, so use light, even strokes all the way across the surface to allow for the smoothest finish. On my first coat, I did notice some brush marks and I didn't get complete coverage, so I added a second coat on top of this. Only one coat is required, but up to 3 coats can be applied to get your desired look. This product dries to the touch in 30 minutes, and you can handle it in about an hour. You can recoat it after 2 hours. I would lightly sand in between coats with a very fine grit sandpaper, 300 grit or more. The cleanup is also easy on this. You can just clean up any tools with soap and water. I did make a previous video about transferring large decals, and I'm going to use the exact same procedure, so I'm not going to walk through it in as much detail. But I have my transfer tape rolled up backwards, and then I've taped it about 18 inches maybe from the end. So I lined everything up, made sure everything was straight. The backing paper is still on the transfer tape. Then we'll just peel back the backing paper from this transfer tape. You just want to know where you can get a good grip and make sure everything is straight. So we'll peel this back. And a lot of times it helps to tape this portion down as well. I won't do that right this second. So I'm just going to peel back several inches here. And then we'll just cut this backing paper. So I don't know, this is probably 10 inches? I think it'll be fine. And then we just want to lay this out, but we want to make sure it's straight the entire time. So that's where like this long ruler comes in. I'm going to lay the long ruler under this transfer tape. And then I'm just going to push that ruler across, and then it's just sticking the transfer tape down to the top of the stencil vinyl. And you just want to watch here, make sure everything is straight. Now the transfer tape is 24 inches, whereas the vinyl itself is 25. So I'm just kind of running this down the center of this vinyl. And then I mentioned I would probably have a small scraper as well, and that's just to make sure everything looks good, there aren't any bubbles. And then I'm just going to kind of repeat this all the way down the vinyl. So we're going to have the transfer tape on this side this time, the ruler under it, and we'll just peel the transfer tape back just a little bit at a time, and this time just a few inches at a time. So a couple inches, and then press the ruler I don't have my vinyl taped down, so I might have to pull it, but just kind of pull this along and press the ruler from the back. And every once in a while I would lift up, make sure everything's straight. We could just keep going like this all the way down, and again, check every few inches, make sure it's straight, you're not getting any bubbles, and we'll just repeat across the entire stencil. And then I don't have my roll of transfer tape cut off, so I'm just going to cut it off at the end. There actually wasn't that much left from the last project I did, so I'm just kind of using the end of this roll. Now, transfer tape is reusable, so if you wanted to save this backing paper and try to save the transfer tape, you definitely can. And just kind of reapply it to the backing so you could use it again on another project. Once I get to the end, I'm going to trim this with a pair of scissors, and then I can save. I have a little bit left for another project, and I'm just going to save that. Now you will want to go over the entire thing, burnish it well, probably from the front as well as the back, so I'm just going to work on that for a while. Here's that tabletop after 2 coats of the linen white, and I'm using a 400 grit sandpaper. I'm just going to lightly go over the surface just to make sure it's really smooth. So the smoother this is, the better the stencil will perform. So that is really the key to great stenciling, is a very smooth surface. So anytime you feel like imperfections, maybe something got in it while you were painting it, you want to be sure to get those off. And going over the entire surface with a very lightweight sandpaper is a great way to do that. Now a 400 grit sandpaper is not going to be enough to distress this. This paint does distress. I am not going to do that with this. Probably. Wait to the end and see how I like the final project. But if you wanted to distress it, you could at the very end. I would probably do it after stenciling. You could use a heavy grit sandpaper or any grit you want to do and kind of distress the surface, the sides, whatever you wanted to. I'm just going to go over this and then clean it well. So I took a lot of time and determined where everything should line up. So the end of this is perfectly straight and it needs to line up at the very end of my tabletop. And then I got a reference point on both sides. You can mark those reference points if you would like, but try to keep something that will give you a straight edge to line up against. So I know if I get this straight on this end, that it should stay fairly straight all the way down because everything is fairly square. I'm going to use roughly the same techniques as before. So I'm going to get it completely lined up. And then I'm going to use some tape and kind of tape it down to my table because the stencil itself is hanging off of the tabletop. And then again, the first few inches are going to be critical to making sure you have this correct. So we're going to double check again. Then I'm going to peel the stencil back from the backing paper that's on the vinyl. Now you may be saying to yourself, I could have done this without transfer tape, Angie. Good for you. I prefer to use transfer tape, especially on something this intricate, just to make the vinyl a little sturdier during this portion. If you don't like the idea of using transfer tape, then that is fine. You don't have to. So you could skip the transfer tape portion of this tutorial. So I am going to secure this a little bit more. It's moving on me. So I'm going to make sure it's lined up again. Just so it won't shift, I'm going to tape this down just for a few minutes. All right, so now we're going to peel this back. Then we're going to repeat basically the same process. So I'm going to put this ruler under here. And we are going to trim away this backing paper now. So at this point, I don't want anything to move. So I'm going to be very careful, making sure everything stays in place. Go ahead and remove this tape. You can get just these first few inches down, then the rest will be so easy. So just take your time here. Make sure you don't move anything. Move this out of the way. Here we have our tabletop. And I'm just going to slowly push this stencil into place. And then I want to double check everything. So is it straight? Does it look like it's straight at the top as well as the bottom? And push out any bubbles. So far, so good. I really do think it's straight. So now we can continue adding the stencil all the way down. I just continued the same process of applying the stencil all the way across my tabletop. You will notice I stopped every couple of inches and I burnished well with my small scraper. I found that the best way to handle it, and that way I could check every few inches as well, make sure everything was straight. Once I was done with that, I burnished across the entire surface very, very well, going over each little detail. Then I started pulling the transfer tape back. So remove the transfer tape completely from the surface at this point. Once you have the transfer tape off, you'll want to go over the entire surface with a scraper well again. You will want to concentrate on the edges during this process, making sure they're down really well. The same general recommendations apply to the Serenity Blue that applied to the Linen White. However, for stenciling, I like to have something close by here because I like to really force the paint into the stencil brush and then do a light coat. And I'm actually just going to do one light coat across the stencil because that's the look I'm going for. So forcing the paint into the brush and then starting from the edges and working your way to the center is best, especially if you have a larger stencil design. This one isn't very large. And I'm just gonna go over this entire thing, probably just one coat. If I find as it dries, it's way too light for me, I may go in with a second coat. So I'm just gonna go over the entire tabletop, over the top of the stencil. One thing to note here is at this point, you could go over the entire surface with a light coat of the white. If you've ever had trouble with stenciling, that's one solution. That way the white bleeds and your color does not. Another tip is to always go in an up and down motion with your paintbrush. That way you're not forcing paint around on the sides and pushing it under your stencil. I did end up liking 2 coats better than 1, so I went over with 2 light coats. I removed my stencil while the paint was wet, so that second coat was not completely dry, and I went ahead and removed the stencil. Just be careful not to get any of your paint on the white areas in this case. Then after the stencil, we will want to add the top coat. Stir it thoroughly. Again, you're going to want to use a synthetic brush. Roller application is not recommended. And you want to avoid excessive brushing. You want to wait for all your paint to dry for at least 8 hours before applying your top coat. Use light, even strokes to get the smoothest finish. Applying 1 to 2 coats is best. You do want to wait at least 2 hours between coats. It does dry to the touch in 30 minutes and you can handle it in an hour, but remember to wait that 2 hours to recoat. The top coat also cleans up with soap and water. And now the tabletop's complete, everything's completely dry. I'm going to add the legs and make this a desk, so let's take a look at that final project. So now you can see this gorgeous desk in place. I added a few things, decorated, and this will be a perfect place in my office to do crafts and so much more. I love the modern look of this stencil, and if you want the free file, remember it is in the description below this video. You can use a file like I did and kind of repeat it over a large surface such as this tabletop or any other kind of furniture. You could even slice away part of the file and make a smaller stencil if you have a smaller project idea in mind. Remember to pick up the Rust-Oleum chalked paint. The ultra matte finish makes a gorgeous addition to furniture and so much more. So now, where do you get this paint? Well, I am going to have links in the description below this video. If you're on computer, scroll down, click show more below the video. If you're on mobile, a couple different ways. You might have to swipe up, click show more, or even click the arrow to expand the description. There you'll find a list of links for the supplies I used, including the Rust-Oleum chalked paint, and where to purchase it. Now I used my Cricut Venture to make a huge stencil for this project. However, you can use this same project with any Cricut machine. You just might have to make the stencil on a smaller scale. If you want to do a large stencil project like I've done, you might have to piece the stencil. So in my case, I could have used Smart Materials on a smaller Cricut machine and done 2 strips down my tabletop at different times, stenciling one side and then the other. That would have worked as well. It would have taken slightly longer. However, you can use other Cricut machines to make stencils for projects like these. Now what's left for you to do is to pick up your chalk paint, decide on the project you're going to make, and dive in to large stenciling projects with Rust-Oleum chalk paint and your Cricut machine. So I really think you're going to like this one, and the possibilities are endless. So if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. If you have any questions about anything we've covered, head down in the comment section, ask away. And if you haven't already, head on over to our YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button. We have videos just like this one every single week, and trust me, you don't want to miss any of those. So thank you all so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.